Hi. Out of the box, the MiniBrute 2 and the MiniBrute 2S give you a mono synth experience. Yes, you have two VCOs, but there's no way to play them separately on the keys or pads. You hit two notes, but you only get one. But if you've seen this channel before, you know I'm not going to let that stop me. Now these are all hacks or workarounds or tricks, which means that there's a weakness to them or some disadvantage. That's why there's more than one, otherwise it would just work. These might help you get more out of your MiniBrute 2 or 2S. Some of them, for example this polyphonic one, require external hardware. I will also show you a few simple ones. That you can use on the MiniBrute 2 or 2S without any external hardware. This is just an overview, of course. I'll explain how to get all of these done. There are chapter markers on the left that will help you navigate and get to the one that interests you most. And finally, all of them work both on the MiniBrute 2 and the 2S, except this guy. Let's get started. So, while you can set the relative tuning of the oscillators, they always move together because they're receiving voltage control from the keyboard. The way to have them move separately is feed either one of VCO1 or VCO2 with different voltage. A good place to start looking for voltage sources is the patch bay. So what do we have here? We have envelopes, but the more interesting thing is the LFOs. So I'll take LFO1 and plug it into VCO2. And let's see what happens. Now my goal here is to find a way to move VCO2 with the LFO that's musically appealing, and not just to R2D2. An interesting way to use an LFO musically is with a square LFO. Now you'll notice the range there was very broad. What we need to do to narrow it down is attenuate LFO1 using one of the attenuators. So for that, I'll take the LFO out of VCO2, plug it into one of the attenuators, and plug that back out to VCO2. And that gives us control over the frequency modulation of VCO2, and with a good ear or a tuner, you can hit an octave. Now we've programmed LFO1 to be sort of like a sequencer that takes VCO2 an octave up and down. So now that we have this going independently of oscillator 1, we can bring it up. And there you go, each of the oscillators doing its own thing. Just to have a little bit more fun with this, I can take LFO2, plug it into the second attenuator, and have that modulate across a different range. I'll set it to a square wave. Let's hear just oscillator 2. And we do need to plug a dummy cable in here to disconnect this knob from the main amp and have it just control this attenuator. And now I'll set the range of LFO2 to an interval of a fifth. So now we have LFO2 oscillating fifths, LFO1 oscillating whole octaves, and if we combine them together in the mixer, it could be very interesting. Let's try that. Plug them in here. And this will sum them up into one sound. Pretty cool. Let's tune oscillator 1. And you can get different patterns based on the different LFO rates. Moving on to the next trick for playing paraphonically on the MiniBrute 2 or the MiniBrute 2S. I'm going to need a way to send voltage data, note voltage data, into either VCO2 or VCO1, and for that you need something external to set those notes. Now I'm going to use the Arturia keystep because it has pitch gate and mod outputs, so we can easily play with CV using this, but you can use any other CV enabled controller like the BeatStep Pro, and there are some other CV enabled keyboards as well. So I will take a cable from the pitch output and plug that into the input of VCO2. So now I've disconnected the keyboard from VCO2. It's only controlling VCO1 because that's the way that it's wired internally, and the key step will be sending note data to VCO2. So let's try it out. Now we're not hearing anything. That's for two reasons. First, because I didn't increase the volume of oscillator 2, but second, because the gate isn't open. So I still need to hit these keys to open the gate so that I can hear oscillator 2. Don't worry, we'll overcome this in a bit. Let's see how we can play these two together. We can change, by the way, the waveform of oscillator 2. Now let's bring up oscillator 1. And they're not tuned, but we can fix that easily. And that's basically it. I can now play paraphonically one voice here and another on the key step. Now, we're not yet playing polyphonically, we're playing paraphonically, which means both notes share the same filter and envelope. We're also playing on two keyboards, which isn't that much fun either. So let's solve these two problems. Let's start with playing polyphonically instead of paraphonically, which means giving each oscillator its own gate. Now we have two envelopes here, but only one amp. Well, the truth is that we have another amp hidden over here. So for that, I'll take the ADSR envelope and connect it to my regular amp. So now oscillator 1 is controlled, let me lower this, by this, right? This envelope now controls oscillator 1, which frees up the second envelope. So I'll go ahead and plug the second envelope into my second amp. That's the VCA over here. I need to route oscillator 2 through this VCA. And finally connect oscillator 2 to the master input. And what that does is make sure that oscillator 2 doesn't go through this amp. It doesn't go through the filter either, so we lose that. The last thing we need to do is, we're not going to hear any notes unless this keyboard triggers the AD envelope. And we do that by plugging a cable from the gate of the key step into the trigger of the AD envelope. Let's see if it works. Right, we've got this playing without having to press anything here. Now just to show you that this is a completely separate envelope, I can play with it and change the waveform, for example. And you can see the filter is affecting oscillator 1, but isn't affecting oscillator 2. Notice also that oscillator 2 needs to be down here because the volume is coming in through the master input. If it were up, you'd hear it here as well. So now we can play completely polyphonically. Notice each of the voices can now have a different length, envelope, oscillator, filter, and so on. Cool, but we're still playing on two separate keyboards. So let me do some cleanup here to show you the next trick, which is playing through just one keyboard. So for this, I'm going back to the basics. I'm playing paraphonically, but I'm still sending only one note through the CV output of the key step. So the trick to controlling two notes with one keyboard on the MiniBrute 2S or the MiniBrute 2 is by connecting a MIDI cable in addition to the CV cable. So I'm going from the MIDI out of the key step to the MIDI in of the MiniBrute 2S. Now the reason that this works is because I've used Arturia's MIDI control center software to have these two behave differently whenever they receive two notes. The key step is going to prioritize the higher note, and the MiniBrute 2S is going to prioritize the lower note. So whenever I press one note, both oscillators get the same information. But if I press two notes, this note goes to oscillator 2, and this note goes to oscillator 1. And that's how you can use one keyboard to play two notes simultaneously, paraphonically, on either of the MiniBrutes. Well, hang on, I hear you say. What's the deal? In the beginning of this video, I saw you play two notes on the MiniBrute 2S keyboard itself. Why are you showing the key step? Aren't you showing enough Arturia products? Well, what I'm not showing you here is that those two orange cables are connected to a DC coupled interface, which is connected to two pieces of software running on my computer, and it would make this video another 10 minutes longer just to explain what's going on there. And I'll make that video if I need to, but this is where I need your help. What's the quickest and cheapest way to take MIDI out of the MiniBrute 2 or 2S and convert it to two CV signals for oscillator 1 and 2? Once you have that, arrange the cables like this to play paraphonically and like this to play polyphonically. And I already explained how to do polyphony before, so don't say I didn't tell you. Anyway, one idea that I had was to use this douphonically module. It's $150, so that's not cheap, but it's simple. If you have any other ideas, write them in the comments below. I'll add them in the description. And like I mentioned, if no good ideas come up, probably within 2 or 3 weeks, I have another video that will contain what I did from a scripting perspective. So if you're from the future, a good idea should be in the description below or in the video that came out before the MiniBrutes actually came to market. But I'm counting on you to come up with an idea that's simpler than two pieces of software, a computer, and an audio interface. I can't wait to see what you come up with. So for the last trick, we'll play 3 separate oscillators: oscillator 1, oscillator 2, and the noise generator. Now this unfortunately only works on the MiniBrute 2S because we need to use the 2 modulation tracks. So I've created a brand new sequence. I'm going to convert the velocity track to be an envelope track. I'll set it to 8 steps, that's enough for me, and now it's running an envelope, but it's not routed to anything. So I'll connect the velocity output to the VCA, and I'll route the noise generator into this input, and finally connect that to the master input. So it's going to bypass the regular envelope and the filter. Let's get that going. So that's my beat. I can change the attack decay parameters of several of the steps. So that's my first voice. Now I'm going to change the pressure track to a pitch track, and I'm going to use that to modulate oscillator 2. So I'll hook up the mod 2 output to oscillator 2 and connect oscillator 2 to the second input, because there are 2 in here. And now this is both a VCA and a mixer. Finally, I'll sequence some steps here. Let's say this and this, and hit play. Now you'll notice that I'm hearing both the oscillator and the noise generator, but the noise generator is too loud. So I want to attenuate it a little bit. So I need to grab the output from the noise generator, plug that, say, into attenuator 1, then connect attenuator 1 into the VCA. Now I can control the relative volume of the beat and the oscillator. One last thing I want to do is, since I'm using attenuator 1, I want to disconnect it from affecting the filter, because that will bring in some noise. So now I've got oscillator 2 and the noise generator playing through this VCA, and I'm free to play with oscillator 1 as I like. So those are a few tricks to play paraphonically and polyphonically with the new MiniBrutes. I'm sure they're not the only ones, so if you have any other ideas, please write them in the comments below. Please hit like if you learned something, and subscribe if you want to see more, because I'll be doing a lot more with these two in the future. Thanks for watching.